so much for being here. It's really lovely to see all your faces. I'm Theo Ganji. That's it? No, just kidding. I'm the director of the MFA program here at St. Francis College. I am really pleased to do a brief introduction of what's going on here tonight. But before I introduce, I want to say a couple thank yous, a couple special people. I want to thank the president of the college. Yeah, why not? I want to thank the chair of the English department, Athena Devlin, who's here. Welcome to this week's episode of the newly launched Write in Brooklyn series, a literary program that brings contemporary authors to campus and share their work. Write in Brooklyn features a bit of what goes on here at the St. Francis MFA program. As the only low-res in New York City, we're fortunate to have world-class authors such as these, literary talent as visitors and faculty here. Faculty, if you don't know, includes Man Booker winner Marlon James. You clap for me. And National Book Award finalist Jamel Brinkley. And recently visiting authors to the campus include, we had Juno Diaz, George Saunders, Margaret Atwood, Paul Beatty, and most recently, for our inaugural Write in Brooklyn event, we had lauded playwright Dominique Morisseau. Good stuff happening here. Before we introduce tonight's absolutely thrilling guest, I want to introduce and say a huge thank you to Mahogany Browne. Poet, performer, activist, curator, host, all-around dynamo. We at St. Francis College are beyond excited to welcome here as our MFA program's new poetry coordinator. Give it up. I want like you to get at least 2, maybe 3 rounds of applause.
Nice.
Browne has been featured on HBO's Brave New Voices as the artistic director of Urban World New York City. Browne is the publisher of Penmanship Books, curator of the Nuyorican Poets Cafe Friday Night Slam, founder of the Women Writers of Color Reading Room, and the director of the Black Lives Matter at Pratt Institute. Cave Canem Fellow, Agnes Gunfeld Fund recipient, Browne has published several poetry collections and books, including Black Girl Magic, Kissing Caskets, Redbone, Dear Twitter,
Hey, woke baby.
Love Letters Hashed Out Online. And you can, by the way, you can pick those up out front from our lovely partners at Books Are Magic. We're selling books here. Books Are Magic. She also released 5 LPs, which is also crazy, including a live album. Am I saying that? Shiroshima? Am I saying it? Her work has appeared in Pluck, The Manhattan Hill Review, Muzzle, and others. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Mahogany Browne.
Thank y'all so much for being here. Give it up for Theo for believing in us. And when I say us, I mean me. First, before we even begin, I put together this event to bring 2 of the most dynamic readers, writers, activists and advocates for both women and young people, and I wanted to bring them into a space for us to look at how poetry informs their work, how they bend genres, and also the fact that they're great because they both frequent Brooklyn. So, before we begin, I want to ask folks to move closer because energy is important. I know this is a college, but we're going to change our mind about that. College learning does not have to be sterile. It does not have to be distant. This is not YouTube, this is real time. So us seeing your faces as things happen, it means something. And these people that will be coming to the stage will be reading, then we'll have a Q&A, and then they'll come and finish their they're set with a poem or an excerpt, or either or whatever. So I'm gonna read their bios so they can come to the seat, and then we'll get started. Cool? Great. Jason Reynolds is, yes, woo, is the New York Times best-selling author of All American Boys, the track series Long Way Down, For Everyone, and Miles Morales' Spider-Man. He is an American author who writes novels and poetry for young adults and middle grade audiences, including Ghost, a National Book Award finalist for young people's literature. Born in Washington, D.C. and raised in neighboring Oxon Hill, Maryland, Reynolds found inspiration in rap to begin writing poetry at 9 years old. He focused on poetry for approximately the next 2 decades, only reading a novel cover to cover for the first time at age 17. He then published his own first novel, When I Was the Greatest, in 2014. He won the Coretta Scott King John Steptoe Award for New Talent for this work of prose, and 7 more novels followed in the next 4 years, including Ghost 2016, and 2 more books in what will become his New York Times best-selling track series, Patina in 2017 and Sunny in 2018. As Brave as You in 2016 was a winner of the 2016 Kirkus Prize and the 2017 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work for Youth and Teen, and the 2017 Schneider Family Book Award, and a Marvel Comics novel called Miles Morales in 2017. Reynolds returned to poetry with Long Way Down, 2017, a novel in verse which was named Newbery Honor Book, a Prince Honor Book, and Best Young Adult Work by the Mystery Writers of America's Edgar Awards. Whew, Jesus. It's a lot. And still mad humble, still fresh to death. Welcome to the stage, Jason Reynolds. I know you hate people reading the bios, but I think it's important. You did a lot. You put out a book a year like Prince. Like, that's wild. Yeah, celebrate that. Next up, are you ready to say, oh yeah?
Oh yeah.
Thank you. Amber Tamblyn. Writer, director, producer, is a writer, director, and actress from Los Angeles. She's received Emmys, Golden Globe, and Independent Spirit Award nominations for her work in television and film. In television, Tamblyn starred in the cult classic drama Joan of Arcadia, as well as House MD. Her feature film work includes The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, 127 Hours, Django Unchained, and the critically lauded Stephanie Daly, opposite Tilda Swinton. Tamblyn is the author of 3 books of poetry and prose: Free Stallion with Simon & Schuster, Bang Ditto with Manic D Press, and most recent acclaimed bestseller, Dark Sparkler with Harper, which explores the lives and deaths of child star actresses and features artwork from such luminaries as Marilyn Manson and David Lynch, among others. She is currently working on her 4th collection of poetry and debut novel due out in Harper in 2018, which has already happened.
Whole bio, girl.
I know.
What I did.
You have so much here. We're gonna do it though. We're giving you flowers while you're alive, huh? In theater, Tamblyn starred in Neil LaBoute's Reason to Be Pretty at the Geffen Theater and played Daisy in Quentin Tarantino's live reading of The Hateful Eight at the Ace Theater, which she also directed. Tamblyn writes for the Poetry Foundation and has a poetry book review column in Buzz magazine. In 2014, she co-wrote and directed her first feature film and adaptation of the Janet Fitch novel by the same name, Painted Black. She also has 2 books that just came out within the last year, Era of Ignition and Any Man. Please welcome to the stage, Amber Tamblyn. Wow. I know, bios are amazing though. Flowers while you're here. So what we're going to hear from now, we're going to hear from Jason. He's going to read a little bit of either of the books, right? You'll tell us what's happening. Yeah. And then we'll listen to Amber read, and then we'll have a small Q&A. Yeah? So please welcome to the mic, the podium, the lectern, Jason Reynolds.
What's happening? Good to see y'all. So I'm just going to read, this is a book called Sunny. It's the 3rd book in the track series, third book in the track series. If you haven't read that series, shame on you. I'm just going to read a couple of pieces of it. So the whole book is epistolary. So it's this kid writing in his journal. He's a little bit of an oddball. He's 11 years old. It's written in prose. Doesn't always feel like it though, so you'll see. Dear Diary, it's been a while. And because you're back, because I brought you back after spiraling your backbone back into place, backity back, Aurelia, for some reason, feels like she needs to be introduced to you all over again, like she don't know you, like she don't remember you, but I do. So we don't have to shake hands and do the whole my name is thing, but Aurelia might need to do that. Today she asked me if I still call you diary or if I call you journal now, or maybe notebook. I told her diary. I've always called you that because I like diary. Notebook, nah. And dear journal don't really work the same. Doesn't do it for me. Dear diary is better not just because of the double D alliteration action, but also because diary reminds me of the name Daryl, so at least I feel like I'm talking to an actual someone, and Daryl reminds me of the word dairy and diary are the same except for where I is, and I like dairy, at least milk. I can't drink a lot of it, which you know because it makes my stomach feel like it's full of glue, which you also know, but I like it anyway, because I'm weird, which you definitely know. You know I like weird stuff, and everything about milk is weird. Even the word milk, which I think probably sounds like what milk sounds like when you guzzle it. Milk, 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 milk. I should start over. Dear diary, this is my start over. Aurelia asked me how long it's been since I've spoken to you, and I told her a while. When I was a little kid and was all yelly, and Daryl wanted me to be more hushy, gave me you and told me to put the noise on your pages whenever I felt like I needed to, which was all the time except for when I was running or sleeping. Told me to fold it up in you so he could get some peace, so he could have quiet for concentration. We picked at our puzzles after work. Yes, diary, we still do puzzles together. It's still our way of, I guess, bonding. Anyway, after a while, my brain stopped pushing so much loud out of my mouth, stopped noising up the puzzling, thanks to you. You know how a health bar make you less hungry but don't really make you full? Diary, that's what you are, a health bar. You take the hunger growl out of my mind, and once I got to a place where the growl was pretty much a purr, I stopped writing in you, but now the volume on the growl is turning up again, and even though it's being turned up, I can feel it working its way down, pushing behind my eyes and marching over my tongue, ready to come out. And my father, well, he still doesn't want to be disturbed, and I don't want to disturb him and his work and his newspaper, and definitely not the puzzles, because the puzzles are our time. So diary, thanks for still being a friend, something for me to bite down on, something for me to whisper scream to, because sometimes I have too many screams up there, and they boing boing in my brain, boing boing in my brain like a jumping bean, boing boing in my brain like a jumping bean, my brain a moon bounce at a party nobody's invited to, and now I can put them in you again. And now Aurelia's asking me about it, about you, asking me about journaling, no, diarying, which sounds like diarrhea-ing, which is sort of the same thing. Aurelia told me she thinks it's a good thing I've been writing again, even wanted to make sure I understood that whatever I write down don't have to make sense as long as it's really me, really my brain and heart stuff. And that's a good thing, even though I already knew that, because making sense makes no sense to me. Sense should kinda already be made, right? It should already exist, like love, or maybe sky. You don't have to create it or choreograph it or nothing like that. At least I don't think you do. So none of this has to make sense. It just has to make me, me. And I'm already me, but it has to make me something. Make me quiet and calm, and maybe also make me brave enough to do what I'm going to have to do tomorrow at the track meet, which is probably not going to be quiet or calm. That's the real reason Aurelia's interested in you, diary. She thinks I don't know that, but I do know. I know because I know she knows I'm scared. That's why I brought you back. I'm so scared, and scared don't sound like eek or gasp. Scared sounds like glass shattering. Scared sounds like glass shattering. Diary, after all these years, you ever not want to be written in? Or on? Am I writing on you or in you? Or both? And how does that make you feel? I've never really asked you that. You ever just want to stay blank? Just be paper or whatever you think you are? Because I know what that's like. And tomorrow my father will too. Also, Aurelia called you a journal, but you a diary. So I will call you by your name.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. I'm going to read a short excerpt from this book, Era of Ignition. So to sort of jump into this, I've been talking previous to this chapter about my experience doing some campaigning for Hillary Clinton and the experience of a lot of women identifying with her failure in the sense of losing a job or, not being the one that's chosen or picked in the room, and instead watching the most unqualified man in the room being picked for a job. Or for any position or being brought into a room. So that is sort of what I've just talked about, and then I go a little bit into this other piece of the conversation. I know it doesn't seem like that big of a deal to publicly endorse a candidate, but this went so much deeper than the narrative of politics as usual. This was unusual politics, a woman, wholly capable and imperfect, yet qualified, going for a second chance after losing the first time. I had to find strength and resolve in knowing I was going to have to watch her get attacked unfairly and be attacked myself for supporting her. It was going to get ugly, really ugly. I tried to explain to my husband, David, I told him how I felt that I couldn't take the rejection of Mrs. Clinton again, that there was too much at stake for my future desires and the hopes for our unborn daughter, that it all added up, and it was absolutely all connected. David, like many well-meaning guys I know, would say, "Don't worry, honey, when Marlo grows up, she can be anything she puts her mind to." To which I would say, that's just it though. She can't. It's literally been proven that women can't. These types of formulaic sentiments, while well-intentioned, have always frustrated me. They feel more like an easy aspirational quote rather than the harder truth. Things have yet to change for women and what we are allowed or not allowed to put our minds to. In fact, putting our minds to something has never been the problem. The problem has been who decides whose mind is worthy. We like to hope for the best for our daughters, telling them to follow their dreams and anything can come true, but often this is just not the case. I know we mean well, but it's hard for me to stomach when the intentions of those sentiments just don't match the reality of the world in which our daughters are growing up. Same goes for our daughters and their sexual safety. It is terrifying as a mother to think about what my daughter could someday be put through behind a closed door, only to have her tell her story and end up being character assassinated and completely disbelieved the way many women are. How do we encourage and support our daughters by talking to them and making them feel powerful without lying to them about the realities of the world we live in? How do we not simply tell them they can be anything they put their minds to, but help shape those minds and all the minds of people in positions of power around them so that our daughters have a better chance of that becoming true? And I also think about the conversations Black mothers have to have with their daughters and how those conversations might differ from my own. I spoke to my friend, Mahogany L, Browne, who recently taught a course at Pratt Institute called Space and Power, The Black Woman Body as an American Technology, which looks at the ways in which the Black female body has been used as a machine to churn out cultural phenomena in art. I asked her about the conversations she, as a Black mother, has had to have with her daughter, especially conversations pertaining to consent and sexual awareness. This is quote, "I've been super vigilant about my daughter's right to say no and what spaces and conditions are around us that make us think we are obligated to say yes to someone," she told me over the phone recently. "No one gets to tell my daughter how the barometer reads as far as when and if she gets to say no. Whether you're kissing someone or not, she is the only barometer for yes or no, no one else. And this is the hardest thing for me to talk to her about because I'm not sure I even believe it myself. The reality of it. Because this idea of chosen consent for our daughters is the way it's supposed to be in utopia. But this is not utopia. This is the real world." I asked her about how race plays a part in these conversations with her daughter, and if that's something that comes up more frequently than not. "Look," she said, "making consent possible for a young Black girl in this country is literally a magic trick. Every Black mother has to pull faith out of a hat and pray it's not revealed to be something else instead. We have such a hard time believing we even have a voice to begin with as Black girls and women. And while I talk to her about sexual assault and consent as a woman, her race is always the container of that and any conversation. It is the container that holds everything we do, say, are subjected to, and live by. Because we are living in a world where people don't just see women as women, they see the color of our skin first. And that comes with a lot of inherent, ingrained feelings. So they are always allowed to treat me a certain way. I tell my daughter that as Black women, we will always be asked to worry about the woman part, but never about the other part, the color of our skin part. Forget about that part, people will say to you. That part doesn't matter so much. This container Browne refers to is something white mothers will never have to take into consideration when protecting their children, which is why white apathy, most especially white liberal apathy during an election cycle, is one of the most selfish acts of privilege in which we participate. To say you are willing to sit out an election because a candidate does not take every single one of your boxes is a form of self-centered blindness. Consider the children of other women, of minority women, who have everything to lose from someone like Donald Trump becoming president, while the rest of us merely have everything to choose from. Thank you.
First and foremost, thank you both for sharing from your work, your most present works. And the first question is, both of you, in your present text, has been informed by poetry, whether rhyme, format, flow. How helpful has that been? And are you afraid of being boxed in?
Being boxed in. You know what I think? I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because we always are talking about the boxes and all the things. I actually think that poetry is the piano of literature. And what I mean is, I think that if you can understand it, if you have a grasp on it, if you have an inclination toward it, if you study it, if you read it, if you write it, for me, it's literally the cornerstone of everything else that I write. Right? The fact that, like, because what we know, you understand language differently. You understand the power in a single word differently. You understand the power in not putting in a word, writing in a word, right? You understand the power of absence of language. You understand the power of the page, composition, all these things that are not necessarily always present when strictly writing prose, right? So instead of there being, if I were to say what is it about poetry that influences my work, I think actually poetry has given me freedom. There's a creative freedom, there's a recklessness. And even though when we think of poetry, oftentimes, especially in academic spaces, we think of sort of like constraint, and we think of structure, all of which is necessary, but anyone who works within structure knows how freeing it is to have the boundary to play around, you know? And that's the way I sort of use it. It's like, man, I can do what I want to do. Every noun could be a verb if I want it to be, because you can, right? It's like poetic license isn't just something for poetry. You can use it in all of the work that we do.
I really agree with that. I think
I feel exactly the same way, and people have often asked me in interviews and things if I felt like, you know, poetry informed my acting, or, you know, what the relationship was between the two, and or if acting informed my poetry, which is nonsensical. Acting informs nothing. It's fairly easy, for me anyway, in my opinion. But poetry, everything for me has always stemmed from poetry. It's always been there. It's been a part of my life since I was 11 or 12 and making chapbooks at Kinko's with, you know, a stapler. And that includes, I think, my filmmaking as well. The movie that I made would not have been made with the forceful emotional intent that it carried, without being able to speak it in words, without having expository dialogue, but actually conveying visually how characters felt. That stemmed from poetry and nothing else. To me, it's the foundation and the basis with which I am able to write everything, including, you know, this book is out of my wheelhouse, nonfiction essay. I enjoy it, but it's a little cold and removed for me at points. But there are parts of the book that swing like a poem swings, and relays conversations about traditional conversations, whether it's bodily autonomy or politics or feminism or whatever that is, but being able to speak to it in a different language. And I think that poetry is really a way for us to all connect and honor emotions, our emotional living, which is not really something that's honored both for men or women. We're told to push away from it, we're told not to feel emotions, we're told that the only thing that matters is rational thought, and that emotional intelligence is not a part of what our everyday living experience should be. And so for me, poetry embodies all of that, and it solely informs every part of my creative life, every single aspect of it.
And emotional uncertainty.
Yeah.
Like poetry's, so I got a home, you know Kevin Proofer? You know?
Yeah.
So Proofer is a good buddy of mine, and one day we were talking about this very thing. And he said something so profound to me, and I don't know if it's his quote. I want to give him the quote, but I don't know if it's his quote. But let's just pretend it is. And he said, for him, poetry is like walking into a problem-solving machine, right? But walking into the machine and just documenting how the cogs turn. So it isn't always about the answer or having that answer, or the excerpt that I read is about a kid who he's just trying to process his own thoughts, right? He's trying to process his own emotions. And I think sometimes, like, poetry has many traditions and sort of like lineages and ways, right? But there's something about that, the idea that like, what if this is about trying to unpack a thought and not necessarily trying to find an answer, but instead like unpacking a thought with a series of questions.
Yeah.
And there's value in that.
And often with poetry, I'll say the last thing.
Do it.
Well, you open the poetry question box. But as you know too, as a poet, that sometimes you can say something with one line and make somebody feel like what they would feel if they read an entire book.
Right.
And that is like a very profound thing to be able to do with a single line, a single stanza. So I think that there's this condensed power that poetry uniquely holds in the literary field.
Economy of language,
Yeah.
absolutely. I love that you brought up process, and also Zorna Hurston had that amazing quote about some years there are answers and some years there are questions. So thinking about the years, and I know it takes a lot of effort and time and research, what does your writing process look like? Because I know a lot, I follow you both on Twitter, right? And so it gauges, some is music, some is politics, some is both. Some are friends, some are babies. Just talk about what the writing process can look like in a day and then in a month.
So it's interesting. For me, I grew up having two writing mentors, both living out in Southern California and being exposed to the Cali poets out there, especially the ones from the Beat generation coming up from San Francisco, which is where a lot of my family is from. So one of them is the former poet laureate Jack Hirschman, who's a phenomenal writer, but drilled it into my head growing up. He would always say, you have to write every single day. You have to write. If you're not writing every single day, you're not really a writer. Like that's how you get there, is you have to perfect the craft. And so I would do that because I was young, I was a teenager, and I was like, this is what my mentor is telling me to do. And it wasn't until I met the late poet Wanda Coleman a few years later, who became and remains the strongest presence in my life. She goes with me everywhere I go. She's with me in an editing room for a film. She is the closest spirit that I have in this world. And Wanda gave me the best advice ever when I was young, when I was like 18, 19. And she said, there's no such thing as writer's block. No such thing. When you're not writing and when you can't write, that's because the muse is sleeping. And you gotta let her sleep. You wouldn't go in and, poke a bear. You wouldn't wake something up that needed that slumber. So let it sleep. Let her sleep, let her rest. And when it comes to you, it will come to you. But to pressure it doesn't help anything. It doesn't help the creative aspect. I think she's talking from somebody who has already sort of found their voice. Of course, if you've worked at it and you know the way your cadence, the way you write, the way you sound. But I loved that idea, this idea that writing didn't necessarily, actually writing down the words didn't necessarily just mean writing, that you can also, that poetry happens in your brain all the time. The writing happens everywhere we're walking on the street, and to honor that as well and consider that part of it. So for me, it's very much about waiting. an idea will strike me and I'll probably think about it for like a year. I'll walk around, like Any Man, which is the book that's out there, looks at a female serial rapist who attacks a group of men in the Northeast over a period of 10 years. It is a very complicated book about who sexual assault happens to, and looking at how it affects genders and the stereotypes of genders. And that book is a very, very poetic book that I thought about for almost a year, and then I wrote it in like 4 months. But I write quick, so I think for a long time, I process, I build a story in my head, I write notes, and then when I do write, it's like giving birth. It's intense and it goes pretty fast. So that's sort of my experience with it.
I don't know, it's changing. My mentor was Walter Dean Myers. And to give some context, because I can't assume everyone knows who he was, but Walter Dean Myers was arguably, he was a juggernaut in the children's literature world. Yeah. He was the only reason I get to have a seat at the table was because this man created books about black children for 40 years. I mean, he was the guy in our world. He was like the James Baldwin of children's literature, basically. And he was my OG, and he said, he was the one who sort of similar to you. He was like, look, man, 5 pages a day, 5 pages a day, 5 days a week, 25 pages a week, 100 pages a month, a book every 3 months, 4 books a year, book published. And
look at us now.
It's interesting, right? So like when people look at my career, that's what you see, right? It's like this proliferation. And what I'd like you all to know is it has cost me an enormous amount of emotional health. I appreciate that advice, and it helped me to forge a career and a life for myself and my family. But I ain't the way. That can't be the way, right? Like it's taken a toll on my mental state, my emotion, my physical state, all of the things, right? It's a real thing we should talk about. We talk about process, because like you got to put all of that's involved in all of that. You're bringing all of yourselves to the table every time you sit down and do that work, and it's just that ain't it. At least not for me anymore. So now I'm trying to be a little more gentle with myself. I still do write very quickly, and the reason why is because my fear is that if I can't figure out how to produce a body of work in a truncated amount of time, my life is ever changing and evolving. I'm changing rapidly because I live a life full of experience. And so you go back and look at something that you started 6 months ago, my voice is different. Who I am is different. My eyes are different. My ears are different. So I try to get a rough done no longer than 4 or 5 months. Me personally, I don't have a job, so I want to be honest. Like people be like, "How do you?"
You're a writer. That's your job.
I mean, yeah, but I'm saying I'm not in school. I don't have a 9 to 5, so I can do that every day, all day, right? But I really try to bang it out 4 or 5 months, and then I can go back. And then I can either move on or I can go back and edit. But at least I know that I have something solid that I can fix before I change. And the other thing I do that's different from you is because I have other friends who are similar, where it's like, look, man, you just gotta like let the music sleep. Man, I'm like obsessive, and so for me, so most of my life is spent thinking about all the things around me and trying to figure out, like if I'm looking at this room, for me it's like, man, somebody had to make these chairs. That's crazy. I wonder what it was like to upholster a room full of chairs. Or man, I wonder what Pantone says that color blue is. That's interesting. Where'd they get that? Why they choose that color, right? My brain is sort of working on hyperdrive, right, all the time, and everything is being sort of filtered through the creative lens. And I keep like a running list in my notebook, and my bag, I have my notebooks and everything, where it's just a running list of ideas. I read the newspaper every day, and it's always like, oh, that's interesting, or I'll outline something, or underline something and write it down in the notebook. I'll come back to it. But it's a constant sort of search for the muse. Like I'm like on the hunt. Like I know you out there for me, and I'm gonna come get you. I'm gonna track you down, and we're gonna make this work. Like I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm kind of like, man, I ain't waiting for no inspiration. I'm gonna go ahead and just tackle this joint and figure it out. I'm gonna bend all the things into shape, which is also not always the healthiest way, right? So basically what I'm telling you is that I desperately need like therapy and like but this is my process. This is my process.
That's
as it stands today.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it's not sustainable. It's been a 15-year career. And I told my agent and editor today, I'm at the bone. We gotta figure something else out. So just to give you all an honest view, right? Like that's the truth about it all.
I just yesterday pulled out of a book contract for the same reason, because I put a novel out last year in May, and then this book out in March this last month, and it was like, talk about a muse sleeping, but it's hard to go through with that, but I think knowing it is like the first part of that process of when you're sort of tapped out.
Do you have any questions in the audience?
Don't come up to us after this over.
Yeah. So what's crazy is,
Now's your time.
this is how amazing these people are here. We have Jason, who is headed to the airport at 8:15. And, right, so we're going to end at 8 on the dot so that they can sign books. And we have Amber, who actually is surviving bronchitis. But she came here.
I'm not contagious.
She's not contagious. But she came here, so 8:15 is the sharp cut. So if you have a question, now's the time, champs. Yes.
Look at that.
1, 2, and 3.
There you go, okay.
Pressure. You mentioned your mentor, the gentleman that was a children's book writer. I did not get his name, and I would like his name.
Yeah, his name is Walter Dean Myers.
Walter Dean Myers, author of Monster.
Author of Monster, author of a lot of stuff. I mean, when you look him up, you'll be like, oh yeah, I read. You ever seen 227? The TV show back in the day? Might be a little younger,
It was the first TV show that Regina King
Anybody know
was on.
227?
Okay.
So it's based on one of his books.
I didn't know that. Yes. 2, yes. Yes, sir.
Question for Amber. You had said that my acting I'm paraphrasing, I thought you said something like, my acting contributes nothing. But what about, as a writer, do you feel like your writing contributes to your acting?
It's a good question. I think part of that, saying that, is just that I'm in a very precarious place with my acting right now. I still enjoy it, but I also feel like I've been acting since I was 11 years old, and I'm 35, and I stopped for like 6 years. I really needed to do that because it was sort of like a Stockholm syndrome where I kept going back to like an abusive relationship. I think especially for women in the entertainment business, it can be a really cruel journey for women. So for me, I think also when you do something for that long, and there really are not, like, you'll hear people say, like, there's not enough good roles for women, and that's really true. So when you're having like a great acting experience once every 4 years, that's not sustainable. That's not a real joy. So for me, it has felt as of late sort of boring. I will say that I signed on to do this incredible show, Why the Last Man, for FX, which I'll be shooting at the end of this year, and I'm really excited about it. So that's great. That's going to be an incredible experience. But I think also separating from acting for a couple years and doing what I really wanted to do, doing what I knew that I was capable of doing and that my heart was screaming at me to do, which was to get this book, which I'll read from in a little bit, Dark Sparkler, which took me 7 years to write, and then writing a novel and writing a nonfiction book and directing a film. Those were the things that really mattered to me. But I don't know that poetry informs any of the acting. Maybe it does. Maybe that's part of this sort of empathy chip.
I would think it does. I mean,
the ability to access, the depth of emotion and take on the way other people feel.
and to know what the words that you're saying mean. Really.
Yeah, even if they're the words from Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. You just make them real. You make them real and you make them deep.
Did you write the screenplay for the Painted Black?
I did write the screenplay for Painted Black, yeah.
And is that movie available?
It's on Netflix.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Please,
So that was a
watch it because
three-part
they
question.
pay attention to that stuff. That's what's going to keep it on there.
Netflix. And we had one more question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Esmeralda. I wanted to ask, what was your main job before this job, and like, what was the turning point? It was like when you're like, oh, it's either gonna be this or be an author, and like, what did you do about that?
Well, yeah. So it's funny. I was talking about this last night with some folks. I sold clothes. I worked in a clothing store, Soho, for years. And it's so interesting because I think it's just important that people know, like, yo, that's what it was, right? Like, I wasn't a teacher. I was in the clothing store in Soho selling clothes and would probably still be there selling clothes. I didn't have the grades to like go to grad school and do that whole thing. I had like a motley resume, and so it's like I didn't have enough experience in anything to get like something else that was a standard, quote unquote standard gig, because my resume was all over the place. I was selling clothes, and I would have been selling clothes, and I was good with it. That's the other thing. Like listen, people be shaming retail workers like it ain't. Like those of us who've ever worked retail, you know it is like it's tough, but it's also there are sometimes some points of it where you're like, it's popping. I mean, I don't gotta be to work till 11 o'clock. I'm chilling. You know what I'm saying? I worked it was a good store. Like it was solid. We was fly all the time. It was all right for me. And the moment I think that sort of shifted it. So I got signed when I was 21. So I got in the industry when I was young. I was 21 when I got my first deal. HarperCollins. Book came out, book flopped. America went into recession. Publishing companies crumbled, right? It was it was a mess, right? So I couldn't get back in the game. I couldn't get anything else published for like 7 or 8 years. I quit the clothing store when I was 30. I was 30 years old. I know, this is real life, right? I quit the clothing store when I was 30 years old. I had just gotten a new deal, finally. And I got the deal when I was 28 and held the deal and still went to work every day in the clothing store while editing this book with the money in the bank, shook about like, yo, I don't really know what's gonna happen. And the only reason I quit and went back to full-time writing is because my mother called me one day and I was stressed out. My mother like worked her whole life. My mom's she's 73, she's still working. And she said, what's up? I'm like, man, I gotta go and do a thing for the publishing company, but I can't miss work because I manage the store, and I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. My mom, who has never missed a day of work except to give birth to her children, was like, maybe you should quit your job. And having an older black woman who has worked her whole life, because she's felt like she's had to, tell her son, you should quit your job, was like, oh, word. And so I quit, and after that, and when I quit, I started working 10 times as hard. It was like, all right, I'm gonna quit my job, which means now I gotta turn it up a notch. It can't be no 8-hour day. We're talking 16-hour days. You're talking about a kid it's like, I have to make sure that I can keep this thing afloat. And it took me, and I like to make sure everybody knows, it took 10 years to make it down, right? From 20 to 30, right? And then it took 5 years after that to make a royalty. And most of us don't, by the way, to make a royalty, to see any money from the book sales. Right? We're talking about hard work. 150 days on the road is what I've done every year. 150 days on the road, hustling these books for a corporate publishing company who take $9 of my dollars. Yeah. Right? Just so we're real about it. You know?
Yeah.
How about you, Amber?
Oh, I like I said, I've been acting since I was 11. Yeah, I mean, I barely finished high school. Very similar to you too. I didn't really read. I had really severe dyslexia, which I wasn't even diagnosed with until I was like 26. So I spent years, on a film set, on a soap opera set when I was a kid, pretending to read with the tutor they had on set. I would blur my eyes. It's one of the reasons why my vision is so bad, because I spent, a decade as a child blurring my eyes and turning a page so I looked like I was reading. Because I was scared, because when I would go back to school, I went to public high school, I went to Venice High in LA, and everyone would be reading so fast, and I was so nervous that I just would pretend to read. So I really had a sort of complicated relationship with books, and it wasn't until later on when I was writing a lot more, and I think in my 20s, that I sort of had this real disillusionment with not acting itself, I guess, but the acting experience, the industry that is acting, and decided to really go hard with my books and really care about them as much as I could and put all the energy into them. And he's so right, the amount of hours a day. After I had my daughter, while I was writing Any Man, I was pregnant with her when I was writing Any Man, and I got bilateral carpal tunnel and Decker vein syndrome in both hands. So, carpal tunnel makes it so that you can't go like this. Yep. Decker vein syndrome makes you so you can't go like this, sideways. Wow. And I had a physical therapist make me these plastic gloves. I write about it in Era of Ignition, that I had to wear all the time. I had to wear them 24 hours a day unless I was showering or going to the bathroom. I was breastfeeding with these plastic gloves and hitting my daughter in the head from such severe amounts of writing for like 16 hours a day. But that's like what it took to, to make that book happen in the time that it did.
It's real.
Thank you both. All right, so we're going to close up, but I'm just trying to do this right. I don't know. Jacqueline Woodson is a literary hero, mentor for you. Wanda Coleman rest in peace, is a literary hero for you. I would like you to read something that would bring them joy and your closing.
I can do that.
Yeah?
Okay.
Perfect.
So say Jackie Woodson.
Jackie Woodson. What would Jackie Woodson like?
Y'all know who Jackie Woodson is?
Yeah.
So Amber's gonna go first, and then you'll close it, Jay.
So Jackie
You can sit
Woodson.
and do it, cool, if you wanna stand, no problem.
Sit.
Cool, stay.
Jackie Woodson.
Made a coffee, huh?
Jackie don't like negative. She don't like tough stuff.
Nope.
Untitled actress. Submission calls for an actress mid to late 20s. All ethnicities acceptable except Asian American, Caucasian preferable. Must read teen on screen. Thin but not gaunt, lean, quirky but not unattractive, no brown eyes, not taller than 5'5", weight no more than 109. Actress should have great smile, straight teeth, a must be flexible, small bust, a plus, can do own stunts, will waive rights to image, likeness, publicity, and final cut. Roll calls for nudity. Roll calls for simulated sexual intercourse. Roll calls for role play with lead male. No stand-in avail. Role pace scale. Character is shy, yet codependent, searching for love in all the wrong men. Character confides in others at her own risk. Character is fatigued, hollow, suffers from self-doubt, a sense of worthlessness. Character learns the hard way to believe in herself. No brown eyes. Character finally finds happiness when she meets Brad, a successful older businessman, 5'5". Logline. A woman fights to save her soul. Think a young Carol Lombard meets a younger Anna Nicole. Requires an actress that will leave an audience speechless, who's found her creative voice, not a speaking role.
Thank you. I know this is kind of like a pop quiz for you both.
Jackie Woodson wouldn't like. She wouldn't like this.
Okay, all right, no problem, no problem.
Walter would like it.
Do it for
I
Walter.
do it for Walter. So this story, a long way down, a little bit of context. A kid's brother's murdered, and that's it. That's what you need to know. A kid's brother's murdered, and he's talking. And it's written in verse, the whole novel. When bad things happen, we can usually look up and see the moon big and bright shining over us. That always made me feel better. Like there's something up there beaming down on us in the dark. But the day before yesterday, when Sean died, the moon was off. Somebody told me once a month the moon blacks out and becomes new, and the next night be back to normal. I'll tell you one thing, the moon is lucky it's not down here, where nothing is ever new. Random thought. Blood soaking into a t-shirt, blue jeans, and boots looks a lot like chocolate syrup when the glow from the streetlights hit it. But I know ain't nothing sweet about blood. I know it ain't nothing like chocolate syrup at all. In his hand, a corner store plastic bag, white with red letters, thank you, 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 have a nice day. And in that bag, special soap for my mother's eczema. I've seen her scratch until it bleeds, pick at the pus bubbles and flaky scales, curse the invisible thing trying to eat her. Maybe there's something invisible trying to eat us all as if we are beef. Beef gets passed down like name brand t-shirts around here. Always too big, never ironed out, gets inherited like a trunk of fool's gold or a treasure map leading to nowhere. It came knocking on my brother's life, kicked the damn door down and took everything except his gold chain, and then the yellow tape that says do not cross gets put up, and there's nothing left to do but go home. That tape lets people know that this is a murder scene, as if we ain't already know that. The crowd backs its way into buildings and down blocks until nothing is left but the tape. Sean was zipped into a bag and rolled away, his blood added to the pavement galaxy of bubblegum stars. The tape framed it like it was art, and the next day, kids would play mummy with it.
Please make some noise for Jason Reynolds. Please make some noise for Amber Tamblyn. My name is Mahogany L. Browne. I'm so excited.
Really?
But later.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah.